On July 28, 2006, Mel Gibson was arrested late at night on the Pacific Coast Highway after driving more than 80 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone. But hours earlier that same day, Gibson gave an interview where everything seemed fine. He was smiling, talking about his work, completely composed. By midnight, that same man was in the back of a police car screaming. What happened between that interview and his arrest? What was going through his mind? On July 28, 2006, Mel Gibson woke up and did what he'd done 1,000 times before. He went to work. He saw people. He watched a screening of a Friends movie. By all accounts, it was just another day in Hollywood, routine, ordinary, completely unremarkable. No one who saw him that day would have thought anything was wrong. There was no hint of what was coming, no sign of danger. Gibson was 50 years old. He had already conquered Hollywood. He was the star of Braveheart, the director of Oscar-winning films, a giant of the industry. He had money. He had power. He had everything most actors dream about. But Gibson also had a secret that very few people understood. He was struggling. According to Gibson's own account to Diane Sawyer years later, the day began with pressure, too much work, too much stress. He didn't know it yet, but that day would be the turning point. That day would change everything. The interview happened somewhere in the afternoon. No major media outlet or celebrity reporter seems to have documented exactly which interview it was, but it happened. Gibson was still put together. He was still in control. Whatever he said, whatever he did, it seemed fine at the moment. Hollywood is full of people giving interviews. Actors do it all the time. This one should have been forgotten by the next day, but it wasn't forgotten, because what happened after that interview would overshadow it completely. As evening fell, Gibson made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He started drinking. He took a few slugs of tequila in his car while he was driving. It was impulsive. It was reckless. And it set in motion a chain of events that nobody, not Gibson, not the police, not the public, was prepared for. In just a few hours, the Hollywood icon who seemed to have it all would be in the back of a police car, his career hanging by a thread, saying things he could never take back. But first he had to drive, and that's where everything fell apart. The afternoon turned into evening, and Gibson found himself at a screening, a private event among friends, the kind of thing that happens all the time in the entertainment industry. Gibson later described the moment as casual, even trivial. He said someone had just offered him a drink. A glass appeared. "It's from Oaxaca," they said, and in that instant, something shifted. This is the critical moment. This is where the story changes direction. Gibson had been sober. He had been in recovery. Years earlier, he had joined Alcoholics Anonymous in 1991 after his first drunk driving arrest, and even considered suicide before getting help. He knew the risks. He understood what alcohol could do to him. But that night, something broke inside him. The pressure, the stress, the weight of being Mel Gibson. It all came crashing down in a single moment. According to his own later confession, Gibson described the moment dramatically. "Years go by, you're fine. And then, all of a sudden, in a heartbeat, in an instant, on an impulse, somebody shoves a glass of mezcal in front of our nose and says, 'It's from Oaxaca.'" He mimicked the gesture, bringing the glass to his mouth, the burning sensation down his throat. And you go, "Oh man, what did I do that for? I can't put the toothpaste back in the tube." That's exactly what happened. One drink, one moment of weakness, one decision that couldn't be undone. But Gibson didn't stop there. He had more. He even continued drinking in his car while he drove, taking a couple of slugs of tequila as he got behind the wheel. His blood alcohol level would later test at 0.12%, 50% higher than California's legal limit of 0.08%. He was impaired. His judgment was gone. And he was driving. The screening was over. The evening was wrapping up. Gibson left in his vehicle, heading down the Pacific Coast Highway toward Malibu. The road winds along the California coast, dark and dangerous at night. He was driving more than 80 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. Speeding. Intoxicated. Out of control. Nobody knows what was going through his mind as he drove. Was he thinking about the interview earlier that day? Was he thinking about his kids? Was he thinking about anything at all? The evidence suggests he wasn't thinking clearly about anything. He was drunk, angry, and behind the wheel of a car on a dark highway. The police were about to find out. And when they did, everything was about to explode. Before we get to what happened on that highway, we need to understand something crucial. Mel Gibson's breakdown didn't come out of nowhere. The signs were there. They had always been there. Nobody was paying attention. Gibson himself admitted years later that he had struggled with anger his entire life. He told Diane Sawyer, "I've been angry all my life." This wasn't a secret. People close to him knew it. His family knew it. But in Hollywood, anger is often mistaken for passion. Intensity is confused with brilliance. And when you're a talented director who makes Oscar-winning films, people tend to overlook the red flags. Gibson had a history of alcoholism that stretched back decades. He was first arrested for drunk driving in 1984 after rear-ending another car. That was more than 20 years before 2006. 20 years of recovery. 20 years of trying to stay sober. 20 years of one day at a time. But addiction doesn't disappear. It waits. It watches. And sometimes it pounces. The pressure on Gibson in 2006 was immense. He was working constantly. He described himself as overwrought, too much pressure, too much work. But this wasn't just about movie schedules and studio meetings. Gibson was also dealing with personal chaos. His marriage was struggling. His relationships were complicated. The weight of being one of the biggest stars in the world was crushing him. What's particularly important is this: Gibson had the tools to manage his addiction. He had been in recovery. He had support systems. He understood the disease. But understanding addiction and controlling it are two completely different things. Understanding doesn't protect you from a moment of weakness. Understanding doesn't stop you from making a terrible choice when you're vulnerable. Gibson would later describe himself as a happy drunk until I snap. That's the terrifying part. That's the part people don't want to talk about. Addiction isn't always ugly and obvious. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes you seem fine until suddenly you're not. The people around Gibson on that day, in July 2006, the friends at the screening, the people he worked with, the people who cared about him, they didn't see a man on the edge of a catastrophe. They saw Mel Gibson. They saw the star. They saw someone who seemed to have everything under control. But control is an illusion when you're fighting addiction. One moment you're fine. The next moment, you're offering someone a drink they shouldn't take. The next moment, you're getting behind the wheel when you shouldn't be driving. The next moment, you're speeding down a dark highway at 80 miles per hour, completely unaware that the most important night of your life is about to unfold. The police car was waiting, and in just a few more minutes, everything would change forever. Sometime after 2 a.m. on July 28, 2006, a Malibu police deputy pulled over a vehicle speeding on the Pacific Coast Highway. The driver was going more than 80 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. It should have been a routine traffic stop, a citation, a warning, maybe a field sobriety test. But nothing about what happened next was routine. The officer was Deputy James Me. When he approached the car, he found Mel Gibson behind the wheel, clearly intoxicated. Gibson's blood alcohol level would later test at 0.12%, well over the legal limit. There was an open bottle of tequila in the vehicle. Gibson was a mess. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. Here's where a drunk driving arrest becomes something much, much larger. As the officers were processing Gibson and preparing to give him a citation, Gibson went on a profane rampage. He made anti-Semitic remarks, saying things like the Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. The arresting officer's report states that Gibson almost continually threatened him, saying he owns Malibu and will spend all of his money to get even with the officer. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a DUI. This was a public meltdown by one of Hollywood's biggest stars. This was Mel Gibson in the back of a police car, completely out of control, saying things that would define his public image for the next 20 years. TMZ would later report on Gibson's lack of cooperation with authorities, his refusal to get into the police car, and sexist remarks he made to a female police officer. The entire arrest was a disaster. Gibson was angry. He was drunk. He was saying things he didn't mean, or maybe he did mean them. That's the question that would haunt everyone who heard about that night. What makes this moment so pivotal is that it wasn't just recorded, it was documented. Officer Me included Gibson's inflammatory comments in his arrest report, and that report eventually leaked to TMZ, making international headlines. In the pre-social media era, this was explosive. This was the kind of story that dominated news cycles for weeks. Gibson had gone from a Hollywood icon to a cautionary tale in a single night. The interview from earlier that day, whatever he said, was completely overshadowed. Nobody was talking about his work. Nobody was talking about his talent. They were only talking about what he said in the back of that police car. In that moment, Mel Gibson's carefully constructed public image shattered. His career hung in the balance. And the real fallout, the consequences that would rip the news, broke like a bomb. Within hours, the arrest report was everywhere. Media outlets around the world were covering Mel Gibson's anti-Semitic tirade. The quotes were graphic, the language was offensive, and the damage was immediate and catastrophic. Gibson's anti-Semitic remarks, combined with his subsequent apologies and acknowledgement of the remarks in a televised interview with Diane Sawyer, significantly tarnished his public image and career. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a reputation-destroying event that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. What happened next was extraordinary. Gibson went into damage control mode. In an exclusive interview with ABC News' Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America, Gibson said his anti-Semitic statements were just the stupid rambling of a drunkard. He apologized profusely. He acknowledged the comments were wrong. He said he wasn't that person. But the public wasn't buying it. Not completely. Because there's a fundamental question that haunted everyone who heard about that night. Do you say things like that when you're drunk if you don't believe them on some level? Or does alcohol just lower your inhibitions and reveal what's already inside you? Gibson told Sawyer that he was working on healing myself and those he offended. What I need to do to heal myself and to be assuring and allay the fears of others and to heal them if they had any heart wounds from something I may have said. He was trying to fix it. He was trying to make it right. But words, once said, can't be unsaid. Gibson claimed that he was recorded illegally by an unscrupulous police officer who was never prosecuted for that crime, and then the recording was made public by him for profit and by members of the press. He painted himself as a victim of circumstances. He suggested the officer had an agenda. He blamed media sensationalism. But none of that changed what had happened. None of that made the words disappear. The Jewish community was hurt. Hollywood was divided. Some people defended Gibson. Celebrities like Patrick Swayze publicly said Gibson was a wonderful human being and not anti-Semitic. Others demanded accountability. The conversation became toxic and divisive. Gibson's comments led to a near-decade-long period of ostracism in Hollywood for Gibson, marking a significant downturn in his career. Directors didn't want to work with him. Studios were hesitant to fund his projects. Brand partnerships evaporated. The man who had been one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood found himself toxic. Gibson later continued drinking the morning after his arrest as he talked to his children at home, telling Diane Sawyer about it. The damage extended beyond the arrest. His family saw the fallout. His kids read the headlines. The shame rippled through his entire life. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a much longer journey. PLE, through his life for the next decade, was just beginning. What happens after you say something that offends an entire community? What happens when your words go global and define your entire legacy? For Mel Gibson, the answer was a decade-long struggle to reclaim his career and his reputation. Gibson called Robert Downey Jr. bold and generous for urging Hollywood to forgive Gibson after his infamous 2006 arrest. Gibson praised Downey in an interview, saying, One time, I got into a bit of a sticky situation where it kind of ended my career. I was drunk in the back of a police car and I said some stupid shit, and all of a sudden blacklisted. I'm the poster boy for canceled. That statement is crucial. Gibson wasn't minimizing what happened. He was acknowledging the reality. His career had been effectively ended by that single night. The difference between Gibson and someone like Robert Downey Jr., who faced similar career destruction but managed to rebuild, was timing and opportunity. Downey got cast in Iron Man in 2008, just 2 years after Gibson's arrest, and became one of the biggest stars in the world. Gibson didn't get that second chance. Not immediately. Gibson's career never returned to its peak following his 2006 arrest, and yet he continued to act and direct movies. His 2016 war drama Hacksaw Ridge earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Director. So it's not entirely accurate to say his career ended, but it was fundamentally changed. The roles dried up. The major studio films disappeared. The endorsements vanished. Years later, Gibson tried to move past it. When promoting Hacksaw Ridge in 2016, Gibson was asked about the 2006 incident during an interview with Variety's Playback podcast. He said, "I guess as who I am, I'm not allowed to have a nervous breakdown ever." He was frustrated. He felt judged. He wanted people to forgive and forget. But the internet doesn't forget. Public memory doesn't fade that easily. Gibson told CBS News, 10 years have gone by. I'm feeling good. I'm sober, all of that kind of stuff, and for me, it's a dim thing in the past. He wanted closure. He wanted to move on. But every time he gave an interview, every time he promoted a new project, the arrest came up. It haunted him. It defined him in ways he never wanted. The tragic irony is this. Gibson's interview from earlier that day, in July 2006, the one that should have launched his afternoon, was completely forgotten. Nobody remembers what he said in that interview. Nobody cares. All anyone remembers is what he said in the back of a police car at 2 a.m. One moment of weakness. One night of poor decisions. One angry tirade that changed everything. That's what a career can become when you're not careful. That's what a legacy can turn into when you lose control. But Gibson kept working. He kept directing. He kept trying. And maybe that's the real story, not how far he fell, but that he didn't stay fallen. Do you think Mel Gibson deserved a second chance? Should Hollywood have forgiven him, or was the backlash justified? What would you have done if you were in his position that night? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what you think about this moment in Hollywood history.